I declare the Ordinary Council meeting of the 26th of July 2022 held in Council Chambers at the City of Subiaco open at 5:32 p.m. Welcome councillors, staff and the media. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, so by being present at this meeting, you consent to the possibility that your image and voice may be live streamed to the public. This meeting will be held by a combination of in-person and electronic attendances, with some elected members and staff attending electronically by Zoom. So in person, we've got Councillor De Vries, Councillor Stroud and Councillor Hammersley, as well as Councillor White on the other side of the room. And attending by Zoom, we've got Councillor Burns and Councillor Jennings. Councillor Kosovic and Councillor Powell are on leave tonight. And we've got a number of staff assisting us. We've got the CEO, Colin Cameron. We've got James Hambley, Bianca Jones, Lee, I should have asked you how to say your last name, Lee Gamore, and Anthony Astoni. And by Zoom, Scott Hawkins, Alex Petrovsky and Joel Guest. Okay, there'll be no apologies because everyone who we're expecting is here. Disclosure of interest. We heard two at the agenda briefings, so for the record we might just take those again tonight. Councillor Stroud, we'll start with you.
Mayor, last week at the briefing forum I presented my declaration for both meetings, so I don't actually have it in front of me because I handed it in to staff. Will that be sufficient?
I think we've taken that approach before now that you mention it. The item is, you might have the number to hand close to me, C1. Yep, the tender for Lord's Recreation Centre, and it was an impartiality interest, wasn't it? Councillor De Vries, did you give us your declaration in writing? No, okay, well, you might repeat yours now then.
Yeah, sorry, I, Rosemary De Vries, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 26th of the 7th, 2022, agenda item C1. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality pursuant to clause 22.2 of the Code of Conduct for Council members. The nature of my interest is I am a member of Lord's Gym. Signed today. Thank you.
Thank you. There were no public questions taken on notice. There's no one in the public gallery, so there'll be no public questions or public statements, and no petitions or approved deputations. So that brings us to confirmation of minutes of previous meetings, and there's just one set of minutes. Those of the Ordinary Council meeting of the 28th of June 2022. Mover and a seconder for the minutes, please. Councillor White and Councillor De Vries. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Well, given that there's a reasonably slim agenda and no one in the gallery, I won't prolong things, but there is an announcement which I think is worth sharing, and that announcement is in relation to the results of the city's what's it called? We refer to it as our scorecard. Yeah, it's the catalysed survey. I had a mental blank. It's the one that we do annually, and we use an external consultancy to evaluate community priorities and measure how we're going against key indicators within our strategic community plan. We've got some excellent results this year. There was a 98% positive score in the field of library and information services, 97% in the access to public transport field, 96% in playgrounds, parks and reserves, 95% in access to health and community services, and 95% again for the Subiaco Museum. But I think one of the fields which councillors and the staff here tonight can be very proud of is the overall score of overall performance score of 73, which measures how the city's performing in a combination of being a place to live and a governing organisation. 73 is our score this year, and it tops the industry average of 66 across the state. And personally, I'm quite proud of the marked increase in the leadership by mayor and councillors category. Councillors, we have scored almost 70% as a rating this year, compared to a rating that sat below 50% this time last year. That's by no means an accident. It's a testament to the work that every councillor puts in every Tuesday night and every day of the week in between, and the great work that our staff do interfacing with us and implementing the decisions and directions that we set for them. If we increase our score by another 20% next year, we'll be doing incredibly well, and we probably can't count on that. But look, as long as we continue onwards and upwards, I think we'll be doing ourselves and the city very well. So thank you for your ongoing efforts, and I think it's a good reinforcement of how we're tracking at the moment. Certainly, we've garnered a bit of support from our community, which is why we turn up every night. Okay, reports of committees and officers. We haven't had any alternatives or amendments submitted in relation to the officer reports. So what that means is we've potentially got an en bloc vote which covers most of the business for tonight's meeting. At the moment, the possible en bloc resolution would cover AR1, AR2, AR3, AR4, E1, E2, C1 and C3. C2 has been removed because an absolute majority is required. Are there any other items which councillors would wish to move from the possible en bloc motion? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to remove AR1, thank you, which is cash handling processes internal audit.
Okay, does anyone else have anything to remove? C1 has to be removed because of the disclosures. So the remaining en bloc resolution would be AR2, AR3, AR4, E1, E2 and C3. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Hammersley and Councillor White. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. What that means for anyone watching at home is that a number of items have just been carried without debate. Right, so AR1 was just pulled from the en bloc motion, so that's where we'll move on to now. AR1, cash handling processes, internal audit. We've got an officer recommendation and no amendments or alternatives submitted, so I'll look for a mover and a seconder for the officer recommendation. It's a committee report. Yeah, it's a report from the audit committee, which I happen to sit on, so I should know that. Councillor Hammersley, you'll move, and Councillor Jennings seconding or asking a question. Seconding.
Oh, both.
Both. Okay. Well, Councillor Hammersley, did you wish to speak? Councillor Jennings, did you want to ask your question and then speak?
Yeah, I won't speak. It is just a question. I'm just wondering, in the interest of transparency, and I didn't pull the other audit reports that had some, some small issues with them, and which we need to fix up, or will be fixed up. So it applies equally to those other two reports, AR2 and AR3, but I didn't pull them because it's the same issue. I just wanted to explore why, no details of the actual audit findings are being made public. And if they're not to be made public now, or staff have a good reason why that should not be done in the interest of transparency now, once the audit findings are rectified, is there any way that those things can be publicly disclosed? So it's just a matter of transparency for our community, I guess, and seeing as, the fact that these things exist are on the record, but not the details of them. Thanks.
CEO.
Yeah, if I could through the chair, and then if I miss anything, perhaps Mr. Hawkins can answer. The reason around internal audit is the function, and as it says, internal, is a process by continuous improvement, and so you get an external verification of somebody testing various processes, systems, policies, etc., and providing information for improvement. Many of the internal audits that are undertaken have matters that are confidential or refer to particular things of a personal nature, or more so in terms of staff and other elements which are, I suppose, of a trade secret, if you might say, and particularly those relating to cybersecurity and all those types of elements that are also considered by the internal audit function. And the whole process, and hence why it's called an internal audit rather than the external audit, which is that of the financial statements, is just that, as I said, just to make sure that we continually improve, and you can have frank and fearless conversations with the auditors to make sure that we're continually improving in safeguarding cities' assets and the like. So that's the reason why it is confidential. It does contain confidential information, but it's also about the manner in which we conduct our business and how we improve security, etc. In relation to matters that are of a public nature, firstly, that would be the external audit that forms part of the annual financial statements that the Auditor General undertakes, and that is an external audit. That's why it's called that. And then the other element of that is how we perform in relation to the functions or our powers, etc., within the Local Government Act, and that's contained in the audit, the compliance audit return, which is done on a calendar basis, and that comes through at around February, March of each year, and that is made public and also forms part of the MyGov website, I believe. So that is the I suppose, public-facing document of, are we managing our processes accordingly in accordance with the Local Government Act, is the compliance audit return. And likewise, in terms of our financials, that would be the external audit, or the audit from the Auditor General of the annual financial statements. Would I have missed anything, Mr. Hawkins, or that's it? Okay.
Councillor Jennings, any further questions, or did you wish to speak to the item? Okay, it's probably appropriate then that we call the vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Councillors, amongst the various audit reports that we carried on block, I've just noticed that we carried 2 recommendations of the committee formerly known as EBSAC, which is now the Economic Development Service and Event Overview. That might have been, well, there's 2 items there. There's E1 and E2, and I'm sure you've all read the papers, and you're all incredibly excited about the Listening to Business campaign, which I suppose Council has given its full endorsement to by carrying E1 as part of the on block, and E2, there was a substantial attachment to that paper outlining all the various economic activities that the city has been doing to date, and as part of that item, we have asked the CEO to renew the economic development strategy to give a more strategic focus to what we might be doing in the economic development space going forward. So those two recommendations are the result of some good work by the committee formerly known as EBSAC. We'll have to work on that acronym, I think. Right, C1 was pulled, the tender for the Lord's Recreation Centre. A mover and a seconder for that item. Councillor De Vries and Councillor Hammersley. Did you wish to speak, Councillor De Vries? Councillor Hammersley? Does anyone wish to speak? Okay, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? C1 is carried unanimously. C2, the annual budget for 2022-2023 requires an absolute majority. So I'll be looking for a mover and a seconder for that item. Councillor Hammersley. Councillor De Vries. Councillor Hammersley, did you wish to speak?
Very briefly, I'd just like to acknowledge the amount of work that the council has done with the administration on this year's budget, and I think we've found a balance, and under pretty enormous pressure from the inflationary forces that are at work in Western Australia to keep the general rates down to under 2% rise, I think is a pretty good achievement. It's always regretful that costs do go up. However, we've kept the costs down over the previous two budgets to no actual rate increase. And, you know, that was because of COVID and also because of the work that the administration has done to review programs and find savings and reset priorities. So it's been hard work, and I just hope that our community understands. It's a little bit confusing this year because we have two areas of rates. We have the general rates, which pay for everything other than waste, and that's a area where we're having the 1.9% increase with no increase to our minimum rates. So people who are in the lower levels of property value are not getting any increase in rates. So we do hope that that has a social, positive social impact for people who may not be as able to cope with what's happening in the community at the moment. And then the waste is a completely separate cost area, and there is a bigger rise in that area, and it sounds a little bit dramatic at the 6.5%, I think, which sounds like a lot, but it's 6.5% of a fairly, in comparison to many other people's rubbish rates, I think we do quite well because Subiaco has managed its own waste. It's a member of the WMRC and has a pretty good system set up. So we are incurring a bit of a cost. I think it turns out to an average of $19 per household per year. So while 6.5% sounds a lot in real terms, I don't want to say it's not a lot, but it's perhaps not as dramatic as it might sound. And I hope that our community can make that distinction, because I think there are people out there that are a bit alarmed because they think there's a 6.5% plus a 1.9%, which does sound troubling. So anyway, hopefully that message will come out, and I know we always do release information about the budget once it's passed, and I'm sure that that message will get through to the community. And just on the waste change, I think the council has acknowledged that it is a big change, that we are moving towards quite a different mix of waste services. However, part of that is compulsion, and part of that is part of our waste plan to reduce and give our community an opportunity to make individual contribution to changing the way that we live and the environmental impact that our waste has. So anyway, I just wanted to mention those things and commend to the council the budget, and that's it. Thank you.
Councillor De Vries.
Yeah, I think I follow exactly the words of Councillor Hammersley with the commendation to staff for the tremendous amount of work they've done with council over the last 5 months, where we've had 4 strategic workshops, and that's offered us a lot of opportunity for input and discussion, which has really highlighted some of the areas that needed to be addressed. And I think there's obviously an understanding that for 2 years now we've had no rate increase, and keeping it at 1.9% has been a pretty good achievement, I'd say, overall. And again, I'd like to reiterate, we shouldn't confuse that 6.5% or whatever with the waste increase. And bearing in mind there is still a 50% discount on waste services charges for pensioners and people on the seniors card, and that also applies for the rates as well. So a 50% rebate, I think, to a maximum of $750. So that's a fairly decent amount of rebate being offered. I think it's just worthy of noting in the report that there's some fairly significant things that we're doing, and that covers cultural services, and I was fortunate to attend one of those events last night, the Sean Dehan Award, and we do contribute so much, not just to the City of Subiaco, but to the wider community. And I certainly think it boosted my spirits to see so many young people out there. So we also have the Tim Winton Writers Award and other such awards, which we promote throughout the year. We have a very strong involvement with the DAEC have an art exhibit. There's a Disability Access and Inclusion exhibition later in the year. But also I'm really pleased to note that the city's working on its RAP, which is a very important step forward in our recognition of First Nations people. So I think that there are some areas which we're just doing so well, and our budget is going towards making our city a really great place to be in. I think I also would like to say our urban forest strategy. I think we're pretty much up there as one of the leading councils on reducing our carbon footprint, and certainly we do have a very decent urban forest strategy. And we most likely will be seeing some really interesting work happening there. Our parks are beautiful. We've got to keep them upgraded. We've got to work on that and ensure that not just the ones that were sort of falling apart, but the ones that are doing well, that stay doing well. So we have a lot of work, the drainage work that we're going to be doing. I could just go on, but I do commend the report. It's very readable. It's very interesting. And it effectively covers, I'd say, every sort of dimension that we could in terms of well-being and ensuring that we are making our city a sustainable city. And that includes the work with FOGO. That's something which is mandated under the government's waste avoidance and resource recovery strategy. And it does only require a 5% reduction in municipal solid waste, but I think we all know that microplastics and the damage that's being done by waste disposal not being as good as it could be. So if we're just doing something towards that, that $19 a year is a small contribution, and I think hopefully we'll be moving forward in that in the coming years as well. So again, I do commend this to council, and I recommend it to read it because I think it shows a good snapshot of all the hard work that goes on behind the scenes, and as we know, a lot of dedicated people work in our city. So thank you to everyone who's been part of that process. I commend it to you.
Any speakers against the budget? Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a question, if I may, to start with. Through you, what's the last date that we can, not the legal last date as far as the state's concerned, but what would be the last meeting date that we could, if we were to defer, that we could approve this?
CEO.
Yeah, through the chair. So 31st of August is when you're required to adopt a budget, and we have an ordinary council meeting on the 30th of August. But I suppose in practicality, you could have a special council meeting on the 31st if you wish to do it on the last date. If that's from memory, Mr. Hawkins, that's correct?
Councillor Burns, are you foreshadowing a procedural motion?
Well, I have a secondary question, if you don't mind, Mayor.
Of course.
If I was considering a procedural motion and the alternative was that instead it went to the vote, and considering 2/9 of the council is not with us on budget night, which is always going to be problematic as part of the reduced numbers, which I obviously support the reduced numbers of councillors, but it's sort of part and parcel that this will happen occasionally. What if we didn't get 5 votes, which arguably, only takes 3 people against proceeding with the recommendation? What would technically happen in that case? So the item would fail. Does that mean it could be put back up next month, or what are the dangers there?
If I could, through the chair. Ordinarily, a budget needs to be adopted by an absolute majority, which is with this council is 5, no matter how many are in the room. So if there are only 5 elected members in the room or councillors in the room, then 5 would need to vote for it. If it didn't pass an absolute majority, then the budget would not have passed. And so myself as CEO would then have this conversation with the Mayor in relation to what possible adjustments may need to occur, or when would we be able to put that back for council to consider and to achieve an absolute majority. I suppose what I'd say is ordinarily, usually there's some sort of indication well prior to this in terms of those settings, which would give us staff indication in terms of what would be the measures or the changes that would need to be made in order to achieve an absolute majority. So that's generally, we would have some sort of warning as to what adjustments might need to be made, which is what we do through the strategic workshop process to understand what are the key elements that council consider appropriate in terms of being able to achieve an absolute majority to adopt a budget.
Okay, any other speakers to the item? Councillor Stroud.
Yes, much has been said on this, and I recommend the budget to you. We have had 4 strategic workshops, as the CEO has suggested. There's been plenty of opportunity to nut out this budget, refine it, raise any issues of concern and so on. It's a 1.9% increase in the rate in the dollar, and this has followed a 0 increase over the last couple of years, as well as a $2 million contribution back in 2020 to offset the impact of the pandemic and so on. In total, if you add the 1.9% increase in the rate in the dollar and the 6.5% increase in the waste levy, which is effectively just $19 extra a year, it actually adds up to less than $1 a week. Mayor and councillors, that's less than a monthly cup of coffee. For pensioners, the waste levy has been halved. The minimum rate of $1,190 has not been touched. It follows rapid inflation, soaring fuel costs, which are with us, very real. But we've remained nonetheless faithful to the city's Subiaco business plan and our strategic community plan, also to recent council-approved major projects like the 100-year drainage plan, and also just a reminder that the Subi Park designated parking continues to be free for the first hour, free after 5 p.m, free on the weekend. This is the first budget by CEO Cameron and this new council. I believe we have done an excellent, very collaborative job, and I recommend it to you. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. I was contemplating a procedural motion to defer, but I can see that that wouldn't get across the line. I am going to speak against it, but at the same, before getting into that, I acknowledge what the Deputy Mayor just said, and I don't disagree, and also prior speakers. I'm not questioning that it's that the numbers are tight. I'm not questioning that work has been put into it, and comments like they're realistic and appropriate. The Deputy Mayor saying that it's a cup of coffee a month, or two if you wish, are quite correct. But the fact that it's good doesn't mean to me it can't be better, right? And I still see room, and I still see wastage that could be removed from the budget, and see even lower numbers. Okay, arguably removing, whether that's even removing the cup of coffee, but I see greater extent. I have concerns directly with regards to primarily the extent of the amount spent on salaries, and I'd like further investigation, even if it's just one simple workshop to discuss that. So I am going to vote against this, and unfortunately, I would have preferred a procedural motion, but as I said, I can't see the numbers are going to get that across the line. So I'm going to hope that I can find two councillors to support me in voting against the budget so that it comes back to us next month, which it seems that's not a difficulty. It's, as the CEO said, it's a matter of just whether it takes another workshop or whatever else. But if money can be saved, and especially in times when I think it was either announced today or will be announced tomorrow, we're currently sitting annually at 6 to 7% CPI, and that I would suggest is going to go even higher. That's just a forward projection from the last quarter. So I don't see any reason why waiting another month hurts anything. Sometimes near enough is not good enough, but I do fully respect how much work's been put into it, and the fact that I'm calling for more work to be put into it, I think's appropriate. I think it's a part of our duty. I don't look to compare. I'll put this another way. you can say, okay, it's 1.9%. You can say, you can also compare it to other councils. You know what I mean? You can do all sorts of things, right? I don't do that. I don't think in those terms. I just think in the base numbers and just say, what's the lowest number we can get it to, right? And how long do we have to keep trying to get it to that lowest number? And I think everybody understands where I'm going anyway. So to get it sent back and put one more month into it, the month of August, I'm going to need 2 people to vote against it. But of course, I'm not. You know, by all means, if council is of a mind just to pass it tonight and move forward while we have 2 missing councillors, and if it was also not passed tonight, that we would have our full body with us back in August too, so that it, all hands would be seen voting for or against it. But anyway, I'm putting it to you that that's where I'm going. And hopefully there's some support for that, and there's not. I understand that as well. Thank you.
Councillor White.
Thanks. I'm happy to support the recommendation. Obviously, in terms of the increased costs and those aspects, I recognise that that's not something we always want to see, but I think the community is one that expects a high level of service and standards, and I think if we were to drop those in any way, we would be in trouble. And so I think keeping a good level of service standards for the community is important, and I think as a general principle, we need to be keeping in front in that regard. We have had a lot of discussions leading to this. And I've found those very informative as a new councillor, and I think there's been a lot of sort of debate and discussion around those various levers that we have for the budget. So I'm in favour of it in that way. Obviously, the issue of equity is a concern, and I'm really pleased to have seen other councillors raise that as an issue in our discussions. I've learned from that process, and I think in terms of equity, I think the way in which we're managing that for people who are less able to accommodate the increases that are being proposed is a really good thing, and I feel very good about that. So for me as a newbie, I'm pleased to see the process that we've gone through. I've learned from this process. The direction that's being taken in the recommendation is one I'm happy to support. Thanks.
Councillors, I'll say a few words in support of the officer recommendation as well, so therefore I'll be entering the debate. What I'd like to say is that I don't think there's any reason to defer or to vote down the budget that's been presented to us, and for that view to be presented would come as a surprise to me. We've workshopped this 4 times. A workshop for the members of the public entails councillors getting together in consultation with staff and, like the word suggests, working through things. There's been significant input provided by councillors who were willing to put in the work and review the draft budget papers, and I think we've benefited from having 2 senior accountants steering us in a certain direction. That would be Director Scott Hawkins and the CEO. 2 accountants we can probably live with. 3 might be too many, but we've very much benefited from 2. Okay, well we've got 3 tonight. We're joined by the Manager of Finance as well. But what I meant was we've benefited from the considerable experience of 2 execs who, as I understand it, have asked staff to sharpen their pencils, and staff have come back and made the most of what they're being given to work with in a way that will deliver high quality services which Subiaco's community expects and deserves. You can always do things cheaper, but where would that leave us? I don't think our community would be happy if we let the place run into disrepair, or we catered for a 1 in 20 flooding event, or we let our library fall into disrepair, for example. All things which require money. They require a lot of money, and this budget is council's commitment to do what needs to be done in a good way that that at the end of the day is costing less to each ratepayer in terms of increases than what the cost of living is going to impose on them elsewhere in any case. I acknowledge that there's 2 elected members absent, but we don't put things on hold just because individual elected members are away. We're a council, we make decisions as a group and we own those decisions, and I think most of us are in contact with Councillor Powell and Councillor Kosovic enough to know that if they had concerns about the budget, they would have raised it at a workshop, if not by email or even phone call. And I know that Councillor Powell has called at least one of you from Bali with something on his mind. Councillors, our responsibility is to pass a budget, and it's to pass not the cheapest budget, but one that represents good value, but also excellent service delivery. And in my opinion, the budget that's been presented to us tonight reflects that goal. So I'll be adding my vote in support of the budget. I'm going to call... no, I won't call the vote because someone needs to close, but I've also seen Councillor Burns' hand up. At this stage, you've got the opportunity to do very little, Councillor Burns, but what is it that you're wanting to say?
I can make a point of personal explanation, Mr Mayor.
Okay, if you need to clarify something that was said about you, you can, but if you want to continue the debate, then I'll stop you there.
I want to make a point of explanation with reference to my elected member, Councillor White's comments, and more particularly yours.
Okay, well, you can correct something that was said about you, and that would constitute a personal explanation. So go ahead and do that.
All right, well, in my reading, and with due respect to Councillor White, references to providing services, on the presumption.
Councillor Burns, gather your thoughts and do it quickly, because a personal explanation requires you to explain something that's been said about you.
I'll go directly to you. Your references after I spoke, okay, to the fact that going down to the 20-year floodplain, etc., cutting this, cutting that, and cutting that. I never said any of that.
Okay, well, it sounds like you're trying to enter the debate. So unless you can direct me to something that I said about you that requires correction, I'll thank you for your comments, and I'll ask Councillor Hammersley to close.
I took them to be directed towards me. Okay, I talked about reducing numbers.
Councillor Burns, that's the nature of debate. We have an order of speakers and we put our points across, and the fact that you spoke before me has resulted in your opinion being expressed prior to mine, and the fact that they're different doesn't require you to give an explanation now.
Well, I think you were directing your comments towards me, and that's the opinion that I still hold. But I'll leave it at that and not drag this any further. But
yep. Okay. We'll agree to disagree, and I'm sure it will come out in the vote. Councillor Hammersley, did you want to close?
Yes, I think we should move forward. I think it is incumbent on us to complete the process that we've all been involved in. I agree that money can always be saved, but you can't necessarily deliver everything that everybody might want. So it is very much a balancing act, and it's very, very heavy burden for the people that sit on this council to go through this process. It's stressful and difficult, and I think we have had a good process this year in particular. We've had a very close look at what we're actually spending money on. There will be all sorts of people in the community that would say you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that and you should do more of this, and everyone's going to have a different view, and we're all trying to grapple with that. and I think we have. So I think we should move forward with this budget. The other point I would make is it is a budget. If there is something that somebody really feels should not proceed, just because we pass the budget tonight doesn't mean that all of it's going to happen or all of it has to happen. It's a budget which provides the staff with direction, but if there is an individual program that people think in hindsight is not good value, then come back to the council and make an adjustment. And we do have adjustments anyway. So if there is something that is really not acceptable, then bring it back and we'll deal with it. But I think we have to move forward and we need to have direction. So I'll be supporting the recommendation. Thank you.
I'll call the vote. All those in favour? And against? The motion is carried 6-1. Councillors, that's the end of the public items, and there were no elected members' motions submitted on notice, and there's no business of an urgent nature, so that would leave a final confidential item, and it's a leasing matter. So I'll be looking for a mover and a seconder for a procedural motion to close the meeting on the basis that we'll be discussing a possible contract which the local government will be entering into. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor De Vries, Councillor White. All those in favour of the procedural motion? It's carried unanimously. Okay, behind closed doors, Council has made a decision on the confidential leasing matter, and the decision is this. Council notes that the lease between the City of Subiaco and the Department of Education in respect of the property located at 138 Hammersley Road, Subiaco, and 334 Onslow Road, Shenton Park, expires 31 July 2022. And that's point 1 of the resolution. Point 2, recognising the importance of pre-primary education in the City of Subiaco, Council authorises the Chief Executive Officer to enter into a new lease with the Department of Education in respect of the Subiaco pre-primary with a rent in accordance with the confidential attachment A and otherwise on terms consistent with the terms contained in this report under the heading Subiaco pre-primary lease proposal and otherwise on terms acceptable to the City. Point B, offer to enter into a new lease with the Department of Education in respect of the Rosalie pre-primary with a rent in accordance with the confidential attachment A and otherwise on terms consistent with the terms contained in this report under the heading Rosalie pre-primary lease proposal and otherwise on terms acceptable to the City. And point C, execute any document, deed or agreement necessary to give effect to this resolution. And the final point of the Council decision, point 3, is that Council's decision be included in the public minutes of the meeting at which the report is tabled. Councillors, that's the end of the business for this evening. So I declare the City of Subiaco Ordinary Council meeting of the 26th of July 2022 closed at 8:17 p.m. Thanks everyone.